Hey, Reddit. Throwaway account here because, well, you'll see why. I need some advice, or maybe I just need to vent. Either way, I'm hoping that writing this out will help me make sense of everything. So, my name is Josh, 32M. I've been married to my wife, Emily, 31F, for 7 years. We met in college, and she was everything I could ever dream of. Smart, funny, beautiful, the kind of person who lights up a room without even trying. I was a bit of a nerd, and she was way out of my league, but somehow, we clicked. Our marriage has had its ups and downs, like any other, but I always thought we were solid. We both work demanding jobs. I'm a software engineer, and she's a graphic designer. Still, we've always made time for each other, or at least I thought we did. But a few months ago, I started noticing subtle changes. Emily's phone suddenly became an extension of her hand. She'd get texts and smile to herself, but when I asked about it, she'd brush it off as a group chat thing. She started going out more often, claiming she needed to unwind after work. I try not to read too much into it. I trusted her, or maybe I just didn't want to admit that something might be wrong. Things came to a head on a Friday night in July. Emily said she was meeting her coworkers for drinks. That wasn't unusual, so I didn't think twice about it. But then, she didn't come home until almost 3 a.m. When she walked through the door, she was visibly drunk. I helped her to bed, and she mumbled something about not wanting to hurt me. I figured it was just the alcohol talking and let it go. The next morning, though, she was distant. She kept avoiding eye contact and seemed off. I asked if everything was okay, and she snapped at me, saying she was just tired. I've never been great at confrontation, so I left it alone, but the tension in our house was palpable. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and I'm at work when I get a call from a friend of ours, Sarah. Sarah and her husband, Mike, are mutual friends we've known for years. She sounded hesitant, almost like she didn't want to tell me what she was about to say. Josh, she started, I think you need to know something. I saw Emily last night. She was at the Fairview Inn with some guy. I don't know who he was, but it didn't look like a casual work meeting, if you know what I mean. My stomach dropped. The Fairview Inn was a small, upscale place on the edge of town, not exactly the kind of spot you'd go to for a business meeting. I thanked Sarah, hung up, and spent the rest of the day in a haze. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down, I knew. That night, I confronted Emily. She denied it at first, said Sarah must have been mistaken. But I could see it in her eyes, the guilt, the fear. Finally, she broke down and admitted it. She'd been seeing someone else for a few months. She said it wasn't serious, that it was a mistake, and that she still loved me. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. This was the woman I'd planned my life with, the person I'd trusted more than anyone. And she did this. She didn't tell me who the guy was, just that it didn't mean anything. I packed a bag and left that night. I stayed at a friend's place for a while, trying to wrap my head around everything. Emily texted and called nonstop, begging me to come home so we could talk, but I wasn't ready. Now here's where it gets unusual. Emily didn't cheat on me at some random hotel or in the cliched back seat of a car scenario. No, she'd hooked up with this guy at the local planetarium. Yep, you read that right. Apparently, she and her coworker had been sneaking off to the planetarium after hours. She said it started as a shared interest in astronomy and escalated from there. When she finally admitted this, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I mean, who cheats at a planetarium? It sounded like the plot of a bad indie film. That was 3 months ago. Since then, Emily has been trying to make amends. She's apologized a million times, gone to therapy, and even offered to let me see all her messages and emails. But I'm still stuck. I don't know if I can move past this. What makes it harder is that she showed up at my friend's place yesterday. She'd been crying, holding a letter she wrote for me. She said she wanted me to read it and promised to give me all the space I needed after that. I haven't read it yet. It's sitting in my bag, but I'm not sure I'm ready for whatever it says. Read it, I'm lost. I've been trying to figure out if this is something we can come back from or if it's time to cut my losses and move on. I love her, but I don't know if love is enough. Has anyone been through something like this? How do you even begin to rebuild after something like this? Any advice would be appreciated. I finally worked up the courage to read the letter Emily left for me. It wasn't long, just a couple of pages, but it packed a punch. In it, she laid everything bare. How the affair started, why she thought she let it happen, and how deeply she regretted it. Emily admitted that she'd been feeling neglected, though she was quick to say that it wasn't an excuse for her actions. She wrote about how the stress of our busy schedules had made her feel disconnected, lonely even. When her coworker, Bryan, started talking about astronomy, a passion we used to share but hadn't talked about in years, she felt a spark she hadn't felt in a long time. Her letter wasn't just about the affair, though. She also wrote about how much she missed me, how she wanted to fight for our marriage, and how she was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. At the end of the letter, she asked me to meet her at the planetarium, of all places, to talk things through. The letter left me torn. On one hand, it was the most vulnerable and honest I'd ever seen Emily. On the other hand, it brought up so many questions. Was this just an emotional connection that turned physical, or was it more? Could I really trust her again? And, perhaps most importantly, was I ready to even try? I spent the next couple of days avoiding her calls and texts, trying to sort through my feelings. Meanwhile, Sarah, the friend who initially told me about the affair, kept checking in. She encouraged me to at least meet Emily at the planetarium, if only to get closure. After a few sleepless nights, I decided to go to the planetarium. Not because I was sure I wanted to fix things, but because I needed answers. Emily had made her move with the letter, and now it was my turn to confront this head-on. The planetarium was eerily quiet when I arrived. It was after hours, and Emily had somehow arranged for us to have the place to ourselves. She was already there, sitting in one of the reclining seats under the domed ceiling. When I walked in, she looked up, her eyes red and puffy. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. I didn't respond right away. I sat down a few seats away from her, keeping some distance. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. Finally, Emily broke the tension. "I know you probably hate me right now. I hate myself, too, but I want to explain." She told me everything, starting from the first time she and Bryan stayed late at the office to work on a project. She admitted that at first, she didn't think anything of it. They were just coworkers bonding over a shared interest. But as the weeks went on, she started looking forward to their conversations more than she should have. "It wasn't just about Bryan," she said, her voice trembling. "It was about feeling seen and appreciated. I didn't realize how much I missed that until he started giving it to me." I clenched my fists, trying to keep my emotions in check. "So what? I wasn't enough for you." Her eyes filled with tears. "It wasn't about you not being enough, Josh. It was about me feeling like I wasn't enough. For you. For myself. For anyone. I didn't handle it the way I should have, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life." She went on to describe how their relationship had escalated. It started with harmless conversations, then moved to private lunches, and eventually led to their secret rendezvous at the planetarium. She swore up and down that it was over, that she hadn't seen or spoken to Bryan since I found out. As Emily spoke, the planetarium lights dimmed, and the dome above us lit up with a projection of the night sky. It was a surreal backdrop for what was probably the most intense conversation of my life. I couldn't help but remember the last time we'd been here together, years ago, before life got so complicated. We'd gone on a date to the planetarium early in our relationship. I remembered how excited Emily had been, pointing out constellations and sharing fun facts about stars. She'd always been fascinated by space, and I'd loved seeing her so animated. That night felt like a lifetime ago. "Do you remember our first time here?" she asked, as if reading my mind. I nodded. "Yeah. You wouldn't stop talking about Orion's belt." She smiled faintly. "That was one of the happiest nights of my life. I've thought about it so much lately. I guess that's why I ended up here with Bryan. It felt like I was trying to recapture something." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just apologizing for what she did. She was trying to make sense of it herself. It was hard to hate her in that moment, even though I wanted to. After she finished her confession, we sat in silence again, staring up at the stars on the dome. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to walk out and never look back, but another part of me wanted to hold on to the woman I'd loved for so long. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I finally said. "I know," she whispered, "but I'm not giving up on us, Josh. I'll do whatever it takes." The rest of the night was a blur. We didn't leave the planetarium until nearly midnight, and even then, nothing felt resolved. I went back to my friend's place, where I stayed up all night replaying everything Emily had said. Over the next few days, I turned to Reddit and some close friends for advice. The responses were all over the place. Some people said I should leave Emily and never look back, while others urged me to consider counseling and see if the marriage could be salvaged. One comment stood out to me. The real question isn't whether you can forgive her. It's whether you want to. If you don't, that's okay. But if you do, then you have to be willing to work through this together. It was a simple idea, but it stuck with me. Did I want to forgive her? Did I want to save our marriage? I wasn't sure, but I knew I owed it to myself to figure that out. After much deliberation, I agreed to go to therapy with Emily. It felt like a massive step, one I wasn't sure I was ready for, but if there was even a sliver of hope for us, I knew we needed help. Emily was proactive, scheduling the session with a marriage counselor named Dr. Harper, who came highly recommended by one of her friends. The day of the appointment, I could feel my anxiety building. I didn't know what to expect, or if I even wanted to hear what Emily had to say in front of a stranger. But when we walked into Dr. Harper's office, the neutral tones and calming atmosphere helped ease some of the tension. Emily and I sat on a couch, a wide chasm of space between us, while Dr. Harper settled into a chair across from us. "Thank you both for being here," she began. "This is a brave step, and it shows that, at least on some level, you're both willing to work on your relationship." Emily nodded eagerly, but I stayed quiet, unsure of how much I was willing to invest. Dr. Harper asked us to recount our version of events, what brought us here. Emily went first, and though I'd already heard most of her story, hearing it in a clinical setting made it feel even more raw. When it was my turn, I struggled to articulate how I felt. I don't even know where to start," I admitted. "I loved Emily. I still do, but I don't know if that's enough anymore. How do I trust her again? How do I stop picturing her with someone else?" Dr. Harper nodded, her expression empathetic. "Those are valid questions, Josh, and they're not easy to answer. Trust is fragile, and rebuilding it takes time, effort, and a willingness from both of you to be vulnerable." As the session went on, Dr. Harper encouraged us to focus on understanding each other's perspectives. For Emily, this meant confronting the root causes of her actions and taking responsibility. For me, it meant acknowledging my feelings without letting them consume me. By the end of the session, I felt emotionally drained but also slightly hopeful. Dr. Harper gave us homework. Emily was to write a list of actionable steps she could take to rebuild trust, while I was to identify the specific fears and doubts that were holding me back from forgiving her. Emily threw herself into the homework with a fervor I hadn't seen in years. She started by writing me a letter, not just an emotional apology, but a detailed plan. She proposed attending individual therapy alongside our couple sessions, giving me complete access to her phone and email, and cutting off all contact with Bryan. She even went so far as to change jobs, applying for positions outside her current company. "I don't want there to be any reason for you to doubt me," she said as she handed me the letter. "I know words aren't enough, so I'm hoping my actions will show you how serious I am." Her commitment was overwhelming. Part of me wanted to push her away, to tell her it was too little, too late. But another part of me, the part that still loved her, was touched by her effort. The real test came a few weeks later when we ran into Bryan at a local coffee shop. I froze, my mind racing with anger and insecurity, but Emily's response surprised me. She didn't flinch. Instead, she grabbed my hand and walked right past him without so much as a glance in his direction. It was a small moment, but it spoke volumes. While Emily focused on proving her commitment, I struggled with my own assignment. Identifying my fears wasn't easy. They weren't just about the affair. They were about everything it represented. My inadequacies, my failure to see the cracks in our marriage, and my fear of being vulnerable again. During our next therapy session, I opened up about these fears. I keep thinking, what if this happens again? What if I forgive her, and she betrays me a second time? Dr. Harper nodded. "That's a natural fear, Josh. But part of rebuilding trust is accepting that vulnerability is a risk. It's about finding balance, protecting yourself while also allowing space for connection." I wasn't sure I was ready to take that risk, but hearing her validate my feelings made me feel less alone. It reminded me that healing wasn't something I had to figure out on my own. The days following that encounter at the coffee shop felt like a whirlwind of emotions. Emily's willingness to move past Bryan without hesitation was a step in the right direction, but it didn't erase the internal battle I was waging. Every quiet moment, every lull in the day, my mind would conjure images of her and Bryan at the planetarium. The laughter, the whispers, the betrayal. It was like a cruel slideshow I couldn't turn off. I began avoiding certain parts of town. The planetarium was obviously off-limits, but even places like the cafe near Emily's office or the park where we used to picnic felt tainted. I didn't want to run into anyone who might have seen them together, anyone who might have known what was going on behind my back. Emily noticed my withdrawal. She didn't push me to talk, but she made an effort to be present in the small ways that mattered. She'd bring me coffee in the mornings, ask if I wanted to go for a walk after dinner, or leave sticky notes with little affirmations on the bathroom mirror. One morning, I found a note that read, "You're stronger than you think, and I'm so grateful you're giving us a chance." It was simple, but it made me pause. Was I really giving us a chance, or was I just biding my time, waiting for an excuse to leave? A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. I received a Facebook message from an old college friend, Nate. He and I had been close during the early years of my relationship with Emily, but we'd lost touch after graduation. His message was short, "Hey man, saw your post about therapy. You okay? Let me know if you want to catch up." I'd forgotten that I'd posted about starting therapy on Facebook. It wasn't specific, just a vague mention of trying to work through some personal challenges, but apparently, it was enough to catch Nate's attention. I hesitated before replying, unsure if I wanted to open up to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. But something about his message felt genuine, so I agreed to meet him for coffee. When we met up, it was like no time had passed. Nate had the same laid-back demeanor and quick wit that had made him one of my favorite people back in the day. We spent the first half of our conversation reminiscing about old times, late-night study sessions, road trips, and that one time he convinced me to audition for a college play. I didn't get the part, but the experience was unforgettable. Eventually, the conversation turned serious. "So, what's going on, man? You mentioned therapy. Is everything okay?" I hesitated, but something about Nate's easygoing nature made it feel safe to open up. I told him everything. The affair, the therapy, the confusion I was feeling about whether to stay or go. Nate listened without interrupting, nodding thoughtfully. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Man, that's heavy. I can't imagine what you're going through, but can I give you some unsolicited advice?" "Of course," I said, bracing myself. "Don't make any decisions until you're sure. Whether you stay or leave, make sure it's what you really want, not what you think you're supposed to do, or what other people are telling you to do. This is your life, Josh. No one else gets to live it for you." His words hit me hard. I realized I'd been so caught up in what Emily wanted, what Dr. Harper suggested, and what Reddit commenters thought that I hadn't stopped to consider what I truly wanted. Inspired by my conversation with Nate, I decided to focus on myself for a while. I started doing things I hadn't done in years, reading for pleasure, going for long runs, even picking up my old guitar. Music had always been a source of comfort for me, but I'd let it fall by the wayside as life got busier. Strumming those familiar chords felt like reconnecting with an old friend. Emily noticed the change. "You seem lighter," she said one evening as we sat on the couch. "Maybe," I admitted. "I think I just needed to remember who I am outside of all this." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I get that. I've been trying to do the same thing. Therapy's been helping me realize how much of myself I'd lost before all this happened." Her vulnerability caught me off guard. It was a side of her I hadn't seen in a long time. Honest, introspective, and willing to own her mistakes. It reminded me of the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. One night, during a particularly intense therapy session, Dr. Harper asked us to write down our top 3 priorities for the relationship moving forward. When we shared our lists, I was surprised to see how aligned they were. Emily's list: rebuilding trust, prioritizing open communication, rediscovering our connection as partners. My list: rebuilding trust, finding a way to forgive, creating a stronger foundation for the future. Dr. Harper pointed out the overlap. "This is a good sign," she said. "It shows that, despite everything, You both want the same things. Hearing that gave me hope. For the first time in months, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward for us. The weeks following our aligned therapy session were nothing short of transformative, although not without their challenges. Rebuilding trust and re-establishing our connection felt like trying to repair a shattered vase. No matter how carefully we worked, some cracks seemed permanent. But as the days turned into weeks, we began to find moments of clarity and even glimmers of hope. Emily remained relentless in her efforts to prove her commitment. True to her word, she resigned from her job and started working at a nonprofit organization. It was a massive change for her, both professionally and financially, but she insisted it was necessary to create a clean slate. I respected her decision, though part of me wondered if it was driven more by guilt than practicality. Regardless, the shift brought a sense of closure to one aspect of the betrayal. Bryan was out of the picture for good. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, Emily turned to me and said, "I know this might sound strange, but I think I'd like to take an astronomy class. Something casual, just for fun." The suggestion caught me off guard. Astronomy? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Isn't that a little on the nose? She smiled sheepishly. Maybe, but it's something I've always loved, and I don't want to associate it with him. I want to reclaim it. For us. Her words stirred something inside me. Astronomy had once been a shared passion of ours, something that brought us together in the early days of our relationship. I hadn't realized how much I missed those late nights spent stargazing, debating the mysteries of the universe. Maybe this was an opportunity to rediscover that part of ourselves. "I'll think about it," I said cautiously. A week later, we found ourselves sitting in a community college classroom, surrounded by a mix of retirees, students, and curious hobbyists. The instructor, a jovial man in his 60s named Professor Daniels, began the session by dimming the lights and projecting a stunning image of the Andromeda Galaxy onto the screen. "This," he said, gesturing to the swirling mass of stars, "is our closest galactic neighbor. And one day, billions of years from now, it'll collide with the Milky Way. Imagine that, two galaxies merging, their stars dancing together in a cosmic ballet." As he spoke, I glanced at Emily. Her eyes were wide with wonder, the same expression she'd had on our first visit to the planetarium. It was a reminder of why I'd fallen in love with her in the first place. Her ability to find beauty and awe in the world. After class, we lingered in the parking lot, gazing up at the clear night sky. Emily pointed out constellations, her voice tinged with excitement. "There's Orion," she said, nudging me playfully. "Remember how obsessed I was with finding his belt?" I chuckled. "How could I forget? You practically wrote a dissertation on it." For the first time in months, the laughter between us felt natural, unforced. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. As we continued the class, we began incorporating stargazing into our routine. On clear nights, we drive out to the countryside, away from the city lights, and spread out a blanket under the stars. We talk about everything, our fears, our hopes, and even our mistakes. These nights became a safe space, a sanctuary where we could be vulnerable without judgment. One particularly chilly evening, as we lay side by side, Emily turned to me and said, "Josh, I know I've apologized a million times, but I need to say it again. I'm so sorry for what I did to us. I don't expect you to forget, but I hope one day you can forgive me." Her voice cracked with emotion, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. "I don't know if I'm there yet," I admitted, "but I'm trying." Nights like this, they help. Rebuilding intimacy wasn't just about physical closeness. It was about emotional connection. Slowly but surely, we began to find our way back to each other. During this time, I stumbled across something I'd written in the immediate aftermath of the affair. It was a letter, angry, raw, and filled with all the hurt I'd been too afraid to say aloud. I'd written it one sleepless night, pouring out every ounce of pain and betrayal. Reading it now, months later, was like looking into the mind of a stranger. The words felt distant, like echoes from a storm that had since passed. But one sentence stood out. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again, but I want to." I realized that, even in my darkest moments, there had been a part of me that wanted to fight for our marriage. That realization was both comforting and terrifying. It meant that I couldn't blame everything on Emily's actions. I had a responsibility in this too. I didn't show her the letter. Some wounds are meant to heal quietly, without reopening. As part of our astronomy class, Professor Daniels arranged a private night at the local planetarium for the class. When Emily told me, I froze. The thought of stepping back into that space, the scene of her betrayal, made my stomach churn. "We don't have to go," she said quickly, sensing my hesitation. "I'll understand if it's too much." But something inside me said I needed to face it. Avoiding the planetarium wouldn't erase what happened there, just like avoiding my feelings wouldn't heal our marriage. The night of the event, I walked into the planetarium with a mix of dread and determination. The dome's ceiling glowed with projections of constellations, and for a brief moment, I felt the weight of the past pressing down on me. But then Emily took my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. As we sat through the presentation, I found myself focusing less on the memories of what had happened and more on the present moment, the quiet awe of the room, the beauty of the stars, and the woman sitting beside me. For the first time, the planetarium felt like ours again. That night marked a turning point. It didn't erase the pain or fix everything, but it reminded me of the possibilities. Forgiveness isn't a single act. It's a journey, one step at a time. And for the first time, I felt like we were moving in the right direction. As we left the planetarium, Emily looked up at me and said, "Thank you, Josh, for giving us this chance." I squeezed her hand. "It's not just me. We're doing this together." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. Months passed, and life began to feel normal again, or at least a new version of normal. Emily and I were not the same couple we were before the affair. We were something different, a little more fragile, a lot more honest, and surprisingly, stronger in some ways. The process of rebuilding our relationship had forced us to confront truths we had been avoiding for years. Emily's commitment never wavered. She attended every therapy session with enthusiasm, often bringing insights she had learned from her individual counseling. She kept her promise of transparency, even when it felt unnecessary. One evening, I found her deleting an old social media account she had barely used. "What is that for?" I asked, genuinely curious. "It is nothing," she replied. "But I do not want there to be any doubts or hidden corners anymore. I want you to feel secure." Her actions spoke louder than words, but the truth was, I was not entirely sure what I needed to feel secure. Forgiveness is a complicated thing. It is not a switch you flip or a box you check off. It is a process that requires work, patience, and an acceptance that some scars never fully fade. One weekend, as Emily and I were cleaning out the garage, we stumbled upon an old box of keepsakes from our early days together. Inside were ticket stubs from concerts, postcards from trips we had taken, and a few Polaroid pictures of us looking much younger and more carefree. Emily held up a photo of us at a state fair, grinning wildly on a Ferris wheel. "Do you remember this?" she asked, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "Of course," I said, smiling despite myself. "You convinced me to go on that ride, even though I hate heights. You kept calling me a chicken until I caved." She laughed. "You were such a good sport." As we sifted through the memories, it struck me how much history we had. These were not just relics of the past. They were proof of the life we had built together. They reminded me that while the affair was a dark chapter, it did not define our entire story. One night, after another session with Dr. Harper, Emily and I sat on the couch, a bottle of wine between us. The conversation turned reflective, as it often did after therapy. "Josh," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "I need to know where you stand. I have done everything I can to make things right, but I do not want to keep dragging you through this if you are not sure you want to stay." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. This was it, the moment I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. I knew she was not pressuring me. She genuinely wanted to know if I saw a future for us. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. "Emily, I have thought about leaving 1,000 times," I admitted. "But every time I do, I think about everything we have been through, the good and the bad. I think about how hard you have worked to fix this, how much you have changed, and I think about how much I still love you, even though it hurts." Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not speak, waiting for me to continue. "I am not saying it will be easy," I said. "There are still days when I am angry, when I doubt. But I think I want to try." I think we are worth fighting for. Emily let out a shaky breath, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw relief wash over her face. I will not let you regret this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I promise, Josh. I will keep fighting for us every single day. From that night forward, things did not magically fall into place, but there was a sense of renewed purpose in our relationship. We stopped tiptoeing around the past and started confronting it head-on. We talked openly about the affair, not to dwell on it, but to understand it and learn from it. We also made a conscious effort to rediscover each other outside the confines of therapy. We planned date nights, took weekend trips, and even started working on a small garden in our backyard, something Emily had always wanted to do but never had the time for. One afternoon, as we were planting tomatoes, Emily turned to me and said, "You know, I have been reading about how plants need stress to grow stronger. Like, if you do not prune them or give them enough sunlight, they will not thrive." I looked at her, catching the metaphor immediately. "You are saying we are like plants?" I teased. She laughed. "I guess I am. But seriously, I think maybe what we went through, as awful as it was, made us stronger. It forced us to grow in ways we would not have otherwise." I nodded, thinking about how much we had changed, individually and as a couple. "Maybe you are right. But let us not put that theory to the test again, okay?" She smiled, her eyes shining with a mix of humor and sincerity. "Deal." One night, months after that fateful evening at the planetarium, we found ourselves stargazing again. It had become a regular ritual, a way to reconnect and reflect. As we lay on the blanket, the cool night air wrapping around us, I felt a sense of peace I had not felt in a long time. "Look," Emily said, pointing to the sky. "There is Orion's belt." I followed her gaze, a smile tugging at my lips. "Your favorite." She turned to me, her expression soft. "Thank you for not giving up on us, Josh. I know I did not deserve it, but I am so grateful you stayed." I reached for her hand, lacing my fingers with hers. "We both fought for this, Emily, and I think we are going to be okay." As we lay there, under the vast expanse of stars, I realized that forgiveness was not a destination. It was a journey. And while the road had been rough, it had led us here, to a place where love, trust, and hope could coexist, even in the face of imperfection. In that moment, I knew we had made it, and we were stronger for it.